بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي إفادة استفادة وحتى تمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير ابتغاء وسلام وطاعته وقرب توابه سبحانه وتعالى اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah. So yesterday we left off. We had talked about one of the dangerous tricks that the Shaytan tries to use against us from an internal perspective. This aspect of making us look from a standpoint of pride and arrogance in our own selves. And we talked about doing things to try to combat that. And now, inshallah, we're going to look at the sixth trap that Imam Ghazali mentions that the Shaitan will try to get us to fall into. And so he mentions, rahimahullah ta'ala, saying sixth attempt will be the most cunning of all, and none but the consciously alert will be able to resist it. He will say, you must work hard in your inner being, for Allah exalted as He will make that show in your outer appearance. Saying meddles with the work of every worker, trying to insert an element of pretentiousness. But if Allah exalted as He protects him, the human being will reject that interference, saying, until now, O accursed one, you have been approaching me with the obvious intention of corrupting my work. Now you urge me to do it correctly, though your purpose is still to corrupt it. I am the servant of Allah, for He is my master. If He wishes, He will reveal, and if He wishes, He will conceal. If He wishes, He will make me important, and if He wishes, He will make me insignificant. That is up to Him. It is all the same to me, whether He lets people see that inner work of mine, or whether He does not reveal it, for nothing is at their disposal. So this is, again, another trick of the Shaitan, where his whole purpose is to try to muddle up the good that we do. And so in this particular aspect, so yesterday we talked about the aspect of, the Shaitan kind of convincing us that, look how good you are. Now it's a situation where the Shaitan is going to say, yes, you need to work on your inner self. You need to work on all of the melodies of your heart so that externally it will be shown. And so you can almost say is that this is kind of like another form of riyā that the Shaitan is trying to use, where he's trying to convince us that we need to work on our inward selves so that our outward will be manifested. And so we come to a point of still wanting for people to notice us, or still wanting for people to see the inward reality that we feel that we have, such that it shines on the outside. But the problem here, again, is that the intention is not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Imam Ghazali, he mentions that the person who is safe from this type of attack from the Shaitan is the one that says that whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests my works or whether He keeps them hidden is no different to me. It remains the same. And so this is something that we want to strive to come to, where we are indifferent to whether we're known or we're unknown, whether people view us in a positive light or a negative light. This is something where we say this is the mashi'atullah, this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to be the case for me, that is what ultimately is going to be the case. And coming to the point of having qina, of having contentment with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. That is how we want to be as the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what we're looking for. We're not looking for any type of ulterior motive behind any of the things that we do. We want it to be a situation where everything that we do from beginning to end, every situation that we find ourselves in, every work that we do internally or externally is all purely for Allah, and that is it. That it has nothing to do with His creation. And the thing is that this is why Imam Ghazali, he mentions that this is something that's very hard to do. It's very hard to free ourselves from the want and the desire of being noticed by others. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about this concept of the human being is that, generally speaking, as human beings, everyone loves to be loved. We like for other people to notice us. We like for people to say good things about us. And we, even when we are striving to make our intentions sincere, it oftentimes can be easily and quickly muddled up because of these inward desires that we have. And so what we strive to do as the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we strive our utmost to purify our intentions, making sure that as we're trying to purify our inward selves, and this is something that we should also take note of as well, is that just as the outward form of the human being needs to be purified, so for example, we make wudu, we do ghusl, we remove najasa, we remove physical filth from us, is that the inward has to be purified as well. And this is something that, generally speaking, is only going to come by way of a teacher who can point out to you your faults. Just like the person who is trying to learn Quran, meaning proper recitation of the Quran, is that you can never do it on your own. That you can recite the Quran all day, every day. And unless you have a teacher, you're never going to be able to truly recite the Quran properly, because there are certain rules and there are certain etiquettes and certain things that have to be placed into practice that you're not going to be able to pick up on your own. Usually how I describe it is kind of like the person that sings in the car. That's, the person that sings in the car, they feel like they sound just like the one that they're singing, behind. Like, they sound just like whatever famous singer or whatever the case may be that they're imitating. But if you ask someone else when they listen to them, it's like, oh my God, could you please stop? I used to like this song. And, I'm not necessarily, let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just say it's like halal music. You're listening to some Zayn Bika or something like that with no instruments. And you think that you sound just like Zayn Bika. And it's like, when your friend gets in the car, he's like, look, bruh, you don't sound like him whatsoever. And so, but you need that teacher to be able to teach you how to properly recite the Quran. But similarly, in terms of the inward reality of a human being, this is, why many of the ulama, they say that you need a spiritual guide, a spiritual teacher, to be able to help you in these inner dimensions. Because just like Imam Ghazali has mentioned here, is that the Shaytan, even in the case that a person is striving to clear up or to purify their inward dimensions, that the Shaytan is still going to try to muddy it up. And so you need a spiritual guide, you need a spiritual teacher that can be able to help to walk you through this, so that he can show you the pitfalls, so that when you possibly start thinking that you're doing something with a righteous intention, he can correct you and say that, no, actually your intention is X, Y, and Z. And you need to make sure that you do A, B, and C to make sure that your intention is truly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the ways that we, again, start to know that our intentions are going towards the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, as Imam Ghazali mentions in this particular point, is that when being known or being unknown becomes equal to us. That the only thing that we're worried about is what is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon me in this moment. That am I completing, am I doing the job that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for me? That is my concern. And so until we can get to that point, there is still work to be done. And so this is why we never let our guard down from the Shaytan. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he refers to him as the clear or manifest enemy. Because an enemy, they're always going to try to strike when you are either at your weakest or when they spot a defect or a weakness in you. And so the example that we can give, as yesterday was the commemoration of the day of the Battle of Badr, is that if we look at, for example, the Battle of Uhud, when the believers, they were actually in a state of outwardly winning the fight. And there's reasons why I say it that way. But in any case, that's the believers, they were in a state of outwardly winning the fight. And then what happened is that when the archers who were told by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to remain in their place no matter what happened in the battle, when they made a mistake and they felt that the battle had been won and they left their post, that is when Khalid ibn Walid saw the weakness and then he struck. And then what appeared to be an outward win for the believers turned into a moment of disarray, because now the believers were being confronted not just from the front but also from the rear, and they were confused as to what was going on. And so this is something that we have to always be mindful of, is that the Shaytan is going to be like that Khalid, where he is a master strategist. He has seen all of the different archetypes of human beings, and so he is going to try his utmost to wait until we're in a weak state or wait until our guard is down so that he can attack us. And this is why the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they never let their guard down from the Shaytan, and they never think that anything that they quote unquote accomplish is anything other than the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it's this attribute of not attributing anything to ourselves, but rather attributing everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I'm only successful, I'm only capable of doing anything because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed me. This is part of the meaning of la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That there's no power nor strength except with Allah. That nothing from my end is truly from my capability. That even from the standpoint of me being able to move my hand is that I have to say alhamdulillah because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for me to be able to do so. Because if Allah wished, He can make anyone unable to use their limbs. You know, how many people right now are unable to use the limbs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them? That, for example, they have legs, but they're not able to use them. They have arms, but they're not able to use them. And so on and so forth. And so it's a situation where, as believers, we want to be cognizant, we want to be aware and thankful for all the blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, and that we not attribute it to anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, including our own selves, and that we not strive to do anything except for seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we don't concern ourselves about purifying our hearts so that it can outwardly manifest. Because yes, there is a reality to that. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he mentioned that, inna fi jasadin mutqatin idha salahat jasadu kulluhu, idha fasada jasadu kulluhu ala wa hiya qalb. That the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said in a sound narration that in the body is a morsel of flesh, that if it is sound, the entire body will be sound. However, if it is corrupted, the entire body will be corrupted. Is that not except for the heart? And so yes, there's reality to that, but the intention behind the purification of the heart is not so that it can outwardly manifest upon us, but rather the intention in the heart to have a sound heart is so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pleased with us. That is the whole point. Our point, our goal, our wadhifa, as I believe we mentioned that term in this during this Ramadan sessions that we've had before. Our wadhifa, our vocation, is to be the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to be the servants and the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you look at everything that we've been talking about through these past 6 sessions, it just continuously turns back to ubudiyah, slavehood. Is that, as one of my teachers was asked, what does it take to reach Allah? Basically, what do you have to give up? What do you have to give in order to reach Allah? Meaning that you come to a point where, inshaAllah, that you fulfill the prophetic injunction when he was asked about the aspect of ihsan, when he was asked about ihsan by the angel Jibril, and he said, "An ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarahu," that you worship Allah as though you see him, which the ulama of tasawwuf, they call this mushahida, the witnessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we say witnessing, we're not talking about witnessing with the physical eye, we're talking about witnessing with the heart. And so when my teacher was asked this question, he responded by saying, the answer to the question is another question. Because the answer to the question is, what do you have? Meaning that if you want to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you want to reach this level of mushahada, you want to have this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's going to take everything that you have. As it mentions in Surah At-Tawbah, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says what? That He brought from the believers their wealth and their selves. In exchange for that, He gives them paradise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's already mentioned in the Quran itself that He's purchased from us, even though but the ulama, they remark on the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is because He's saying that He purchased from us ourselves. Whereas that we know, for example, even from the famous dua that usually we say when someone passes away, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that verily we are from Allah and to Him we are returning. We are already the slaves, the property of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even still, He says that we purchased from the believers their wealth and their selves. And this is from, again, nothing more than the fadl and the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that, just imagine that you own something and you're going to pay someone else for something that you own. And then after that, you're going to give them an extra reward for that. Like, that would never happen. But this is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with His servants. Is that He is Kareem. He is extremely generous. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He's purchased from the believers their wealth and their selves. In exchange for that, He gives them paradise. And so that means that all of us, every aspect of our being, and all the provisions that we have are ultimately supposed to be solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why we see the likeness of, for example, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, where Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, and again, this is one of those situations where it's permissible to compete, is that Umar has said to himself that I'm going to outstrip Abu Bakr. I'm going to be better than Abu Bakr. I'm going to beat Abu Bakr. And many people are familiar with this story. It's a story that's recounted all the time. And so what was Umar talking about? He was talking about a time when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had asked for the Sahaba to give money towards one of the jaysh, towards one of the armies, that the Prophet ﷺ was trying to fund one of the armies, and so he was asking for the Sahaba to give in terms of their wealth to assist the army. And so Umar has said that I'm going to beat Abu Bakr. And so he came to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to give. And the Messenger ﷺ, he asked Umar, Ya Umar, what did you bring? And Umar, feeling like, I've done it. Like, Umar said, I brought half my wealth. And the Prophet ﷺ asked, and what did you leave for your family? And Umar said, I left them half. And so we can stop right there. That, for example, right now in the month of Ramadan, you have many different organizations, many different Islamic groups, many masajids, and so on and so forth, who are doing fundraisers. The Mecca Center is doing a fundraiser. Other groups are doing fundraisers, and so on and so forth. This is a time that, generally speaking, many Islamic organizations will strive to try to receive funds to help them do the work that they're doing. And so let's just think about it from the standpoint of Umar, that if all of us, we were to look at our bank account, and don't worry, I'm not necessarily trying to do a fundraiser at this point, but there is a reality to this. Let's just say that all of us were to look at our bank account, and after having paid off all the obligatory things that we have to pay off, because those things take precedence, you can't do the supererogatory before you've completed the obligatory. And so let's just say that after we've secured our financial obligations that people have upon us, whatever we have left over, how many of us can truly say that whatever it is, it doesn't matter what the amount is, that half of that, 50%, is going fi sabilillah? Like, we choose whichever organization that you feel is doing the best work, that, is truly benefiting the Muslims, whatever the case may be, whether it's helping the Mecca Center, whether it's helping the people in Palestine, whether it's helping your local masjid, or whatever the case may be, or even if you just want to spread it around across those, but it's just to say that I'm taking half of my wealth and giving it fi sabilillah. How many of us can do that? That's a valid question that we can ask ourselves. How many of us are truly willing, even just to give half of what Allah SWT has given us? Because at the end of the day, it's not truly our wealth. Isn't it correct that in the Quran Allah SWT says, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that for Allah or to Allah belongs what is in the heavens and the earth? Isn't that the case? So that means that everything, including our wealth, is not ours. And so, technically speaking, if there is something that is going to be a benefit that Allah SWT is going to be pleased with us with, is that it shouldn't be a case where we feel any type of way in terms of giving it up, so to speak. And so Umar was like, Yani, I'm giving half my wealth. Khalas. It's done. Like, who's gonna try to surpass that? Abu Bakr comes. And some of the descriptions, they actually mention that Abu Bakr comes and he's not paying attention to anyone. Like, Umar, he's trying to compete with Abu Bakr. Like, his goal is to try to outdo Abu Bakr, because everyone kind of, pretty much from the Sahaba standpoint, they know that Abu Bakr is kind of like the gold standard in terms of what it means to be a Sadiq. This is why he's known as Abu Bakr Siddiq. That it's pretty much, in terms of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is considered to be basically a consensus, ijma', that the best person after the Sahaba, period, is Abu Bakr. According to the ulama of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they say that the order of fadl, the order of merit in terms of the Sahaba, is in order of the Khulafa. That Abu Bakr, then Umar, then Uthman, then Ali. These are the four best. But who's number one? Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr comes and he's not paying attention to anyone. Like, it's as if no one else matters. He's not concerned with anyone. And what does he do? He gives his wealth. And the Prophet ﷺ asks him the same question. Ya Abu Bakr, what did you bring? What does Abu Bakr say? Ya Rasulullah, I've brought them all. I bought all of it. And then when the Prophet ﷺ asks him, what did you leave for your family? What does he say? I let them Allah and His Messenger. Yani, he is living the reality of Hasbunallah wa ni'ma wakil. Allah is my sufficiency, and He is an excellent provider. And He's an excellent overseer or overlooker. I'm not sure what is probably the best way to translate wakil, but the best guardian you could possibly translate it as. Like, he is living that reality. And that's just one example. Another example can be seen in Surah Al-Layl. And some of you may have heard me mention this, is that if you look in the tafsir of Surah Al-Layl, that's when Allah SWT talks about the individual in Surah Al-Layl, towards the end of the surah, that Allah SWT, He mentions the individual, الذي يؤتي مالهم يتزكى وما لأحد عنده من نعمة تجزى إلا ابتغاء وجه ربه الأعلى ولا سوف يرضى. That Allah SWT, He's describing a particular individual. الذي يؤتي ماله يتزكى, the one that gives his wealth in order to purify himself. يتزكى وما لأحد عنده من نعمة تجزى. And he doesn't look to anyone for any type of reward. Like, he's not looking for any type of repayment. إلا ابتغاء وجه ربه الأعلى. The only thing that he's looking for is his Lord's pleasure, the essence of his Lord. Okay, that's a hard verse to translate, mashallah. But essentially, the meaning of it is that he's only interested in his Lord's pleasure. He's only looking for the countenance of his Lord. And what does Allah SWT say about that individual? وَلَا سَوْفَ يَرْضَى. And for him, he is going to be well pleased. And again, if you look at the books of tafsir, they explain that this is actually talking about Abu Bakr. And the context of it is that they say that Abu Bakr, during his time before the migration to Medina, when you had some of the Muslim slaves who were being tortured because of their Islam, that Abu Bakr would go around purchasing these individuals. The most famous story is when Abu Bakr had purchased Bilal ibn Rabah. And the thing is that for the purpose of the Arabs, is that generally speaking, it was only considered to be worth it, quote unquote, in terms of freeing a slave, if you felt that that slave can benefit you in some way. Like, for example, if you saw a slave that was extremely strong or extremely intelligent or something like that, that you might free that slave in order for that slave that is now free to be in debt to you, essentially. That the expectation was that if you freed someone, they would be indebted to you, so that their praiseworthy traits, you will be able to benefit from that later on. However, Abu Bakr, when he's going around freeing these Muslim slaves, these are slaves that are considered to be of the du'afa. These are the weak slaves. These are sometimes people who don't have a lot of physical strength. They don't necessarily seem to have the most striking intelligence, even though intelligence, as the Prophet ﷺ would, and this is the reason why the Prophet ﷺ had given Abu Jahl the name Abu Jahl. Ultimate intelligence, a true use of your aql, is that it's going to lead you to La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. So these were actually the most intelligent of the people of Mecca at that time, that they could come to the understanding that La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, that is the true reality. That is a person that's truly using their intellect. But in any case, from the outward perspective, they weren't perceived as being necessarily the most intelligent, and so on and so forth. Even to the point that the father, Abu Bakr, Abu Quhafa, had asked his son, "Ya, my son, I see you freeing these weak slaves." This is before the father, Abu Bakr, can become Muslim. So he's saying to his son, "I see you freeing these weak slaves. Why don't you free some strong slaves so that they can help you, so that they could be a benefit to you?" And Abu Bakr, he had explained to his father that I'm not doing it for that. I'm not doing this to receive any type of benefit or exchange from anyone else. I'm doing this, why? Purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so just as Abu Bakr was spending his wealth to purify his wealth and purify himself, and he wasn't looking for any type of praise or any type of recognition or to try to have his outwards look better or whatever the case may be, that is where we're trying to go. That is where we're trying to be. Where again, that being known or unknown, being liked or disliked, so on and so forth, like none of those things are motivating factors. They're just side effects of our ultimate purpose. So if we become known, that's just a side effect of what I'm really trying to focus on. If we're unknown, that's a side effect of what I'm trying to focus on. I'm not worried about that. I'm only worried about Allah, Allah, Allah. This is what we mentioned before, is that, the Ahlul Tasawwuf, the people of spiritual excellence, they mention is that what we want to come to is getting rid of the ana. And that is what the Shaytan will often try to use against us. He tries to use our own selves against us. And so this is why we have to work hard to do our best to not fall into these traps. And the thing is that oftentimes it's very difficult to try to ascertain these things on our own. And so this is why, generally speaking, they say that you want to do your best to try to find a spiritual guide that can help you to recognize the spiritual diseases of the heart that you may have, to be able to help you to purify your heart from them. Because again, us as human beings, we can think the best of ourselves, just like the person that thinks they sound just like Zayn Bika, but someone else that listens to them will just be like, yeah, bruh, no, you need a lot of work if you're trying to get anywhere near that. Similarly, in terms of the aspect of purification of the heart, is that we may think, or we can sometimes be, as we're talking about here, be tricked by the shaitan that we're doing things for the sake of Allah, that we have intentions purely for Allah, but if we really were to look down deep into ourselves, is actually not the case. And so this is why these things are so dangerous, is because they're very hard to detect. It's very hard to really sift out these things. And so, we really want to strive to be in a situation where we are working to learn what these things are and doing our best to remove them from us so that we can keep ourselves, as one of my teachers would say, keep our heads on our shoulders with the king. That, we don't want to have our intentions be muddled up in any type of way. But it takes striving, it takes good sahbah, having good companionship, and having someone that can help us to recognize the faults that we have and show us the way of how to purify ourselves of those faults. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and assist us in removing these faults from us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us be of those who are aware of these traps of the shaitan so that we can protect ourselves from it. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless us in this month of Ramadan and then also outside of this month of Ramadan, such that we don't become, quote unquote, Ramadan Muslims. That, we don't want it to be a situation where we do all of this ibadah in Ramadan and, we're such better Muslims in Ramadan, but then afterwards we just kind of go back to the status quo. One of the ways that one of my friends have put it, we don't want to make the Eid a welcome home party for Shaytan. Wa na'udhu billah. That, the spiritual what's the word I'm looking for? The spiritual achievements that we have in Ramadan, we don't want it to end on the last day of Ramadan. This is one of the reasons why, even for example, the ulama, they say that on the day of Eid, you should do your utmost to do, or should I say on the night / the day of Eid, you should do your utmost to do 3 things. 1, pray Isha in congregation. Pray Isha, particularly for a man, praying Isha in the masjid. 2, getting up for tahajjud. That's, we've been spending the last 29-30 days getting up for suhoor, so that's already tahajjud time. So get up for tahajjud on the day of Eid. And then 3, praying Salat al-Fajr, either in congregation or, for a woman in congregation, or for a man, ideally praying in the masjid. So this is kind of like an emphasis in terms of your ibadah not being limited to just Ramadan. That on the day of Eid, that you're still keeping up with these highly praiseworthy acts of worship. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify our hearts and make us of those who have true intentions and are not tricked by the shaitan in our acts of worship. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can continue to accept from us our deeds and forgive us for when we may fall short, and keep us away from those things that are either displeasing or disobedient to Him. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa hasbana ni'mal wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.